Well, good morning, and welcome to everyone back from, who went to the Million Women DC event? Yeah? Prayer meeting, I should say. Glad you guys are all home, and I heard it was powerful, and I think almost 400,000 people showed up for that. So that's incredible, and I think and believe that God did some amazing things in the atmosphere. As we move in, we got a couple more weeks for our elections to be held, and so just be in prayer and ask Holy Spirit to guide and direct you. So there's a lot of things in, of course, the nation, but even locally that we need to pay attention to. And I'll be dropping more things in our touch point along the line. So if you're not receiving touch point, there's touch point everything throughout the week. Touch point daily, and there's our weekly touch point. Those are things that I produce and we send out. And I don't have. How many people are getting the dailies, the touch point daily? Yeah, good, a lot of you. So wonderful. Glad you guys are getting it. We're going to resume. Anytime there's a guest speaker, we don't have their notes. So you're not going to see anything. But for the next several weeks, it'll start again on Tuesday. You'll get an email tomorrow. And then we start just diving into Esther. And so that's what I want to talk to you about today. And just to let you know, I don't see Jordan here, but if you see him, it is his birthday today. And so you guys can embarrass him if you want a spontaneous clap, if you guys want to, I know he's going to come in, but I don't know if he's going to go to the back, the sound booth or somewhere else. But happy birthday to Jordan. And I think those are all am I missing anything on any other? You have to look at the wife, because they keep track of everything. And so we're good? Yeah, we're good? All right. Take your Bibles. We're going to be moving fairly quickly through the book of Esther. And Esther is 10 chapters. So I'm going to try and cover 10 chapters in about 40 minutes. How many have faith for that? And I can't remember the last time I've spoke out of the book of Esther. But we're in a series called Stand, and we've looked at Shadrach, Meshach, and Benny. We looked at King Josiah. We looked at, I don't even know what we did the first week. Who did we do the first week? Daniel. We did Daniel? No, I don't think we did. We did somebody. Was it David and Goliath? Come on, man. How can I forget that? David and Goliath. Next week, we're going to be looking at Elijah. And I just love the showdown with the prophets of Baal. And I do believe there's a showdown taking place even in our nation. And so, as we look into the book of Esther, what I want to do is I get fascinated with side trails in the book. There's the obvious things that are in front of us, and I know it says here that it's the unwavering conviction to rescue a nation, but it's really a divine reversal of what the Lord does, and it's got to be one of the best stories in the Bible. I mean, you can't top Jesus, right? I mean, you're just not going to top all the miracles, but what we see here is just crazy stuff that's taking place, and it probably deserves about 5 or 6 weeks. But I think we'll be able to get through it today. So at least do a flyover today. So let me just kind of set the stage for you. Israel, as you know, was captured for about 70 years. And we talk about that as the Babylonian captivity. And the Babylonian Empire is conquered by the Persian Empire. And the first king in the Persian Empire is named Cyrus. And we know, there's a lot of people have been writing about Cyrus over the last 4 years and connecting it to political figures and all kinds of things. But Cyrus was the first king of Persia, and he actually allowed the Jews to go back to Jerusalem. And so he kind of lifts this 70 years of bondage the Babylonians had, and that was actually predicted in the Old Testament. Earlier in the Old Testament, they'd be captive for 70 years. And Cyrus goes ahead and releases the Jews from this captivity and says, you can go back to your homeland, which is Jerusalem. And so following Cyrus, well, obviously they said about 50,000, roughly about 50,000 Jews leave the Persian Empire and assemble in Jerusalem, right around there. So the Persian Empire was, some say, between 25 million to 37 million people. It was a very expansive empire. Now, California has about 35 million people in it, but it's condensed 35 million. This is it's in Egypt, it's covered India, this Persian Empire was vast, and there was probably about, they say, several 100,000 Jews. So some say 400,000, some say up to 1 million Jews that were living in the Persian Empire. Cyrus comes on the scene and he says, and Jerusalem is actually part of the empire. And so Cyrus comes on the scene and says, you know what, we're gonna release the Jews from their captivity. You're welcome to go back to the Holy Land. And so you have about 50,000 or so Jews who go back to the Holy Land, which is Jerusalem, but you still have a number of Jews that are scattered throughout Persia. And so this is what's happening with Cyrus. And then Darius comes on the scene, and you guys know that Daniel is connected to Darius. So you have all these different players in the Old Testament, Daniel, and you have Nehemiah, and you have Ezra. You have all these players in the Old Testament, and I just want to know chronologically how that all fits together. So after Cyrus comes Darius. Darius becomes king, and he rules and reigns, and we know that Daniel's connected to Darius, and different prophets are connected to Darius as well. And then after Darius comes into power about 522, and about 486 BC, which is a long time ago, Xerxes comes into power. And Xerxes rules and reigns from about 486 BC to about 465, not about 465. He ends his rulership at 465 because he was assassinated by, royalty is great in the kingdom, but royalty is ugly and bloody in a lot of, so a couple dudes went after Xerxes and killed him, and his son, Artaxerxes, comes into power. Well, Esther marries Xerxes. So you have Cyrus, you have Darius, you have, I think I'm pronouncing his name right, but you have Xerxes and you have Artaxerxes. So you have Cyrus here, Darius here, you have Daniel here, and then this picture of Esther is under the rule and reign of Xerxes, who rules for about 30 years. And so this is where the story of Esther picks up. And then after Esther's story, when Artaxerxes becomes ruler or emperor of the Persian Empire, that's where you see Nehemiah, that's where you see Ezra, that's where you see the building of the wall around Jerusalem. So in between Cyrus and Darius, and at the end where you have Nehemiah, you have Esther. And Xerxes was in power. He was probably 36 to 46 years old. And now Esther chapter 1, because I'm just going to explain it to you. So Xerxes is in power, and he's having a really nice banquet. They're probably eating some good food and getting a little tipsy, because that's what they did. And so he says, hey, I want Queen Vashti to show up in all her beauty, who was the queen to the king Xerxes. Well, Vashti says basically, I'm not going there, I'm not showing up. Now, usually in those days, the emperor would have his own space and the queen would have her own space. And so when you were summoned by the king at an event and you refused to show up, that is, number one, very embarrassing for the king. Number two, it was extremely dishonoring, and for whatever reason, the Bible doesn't say, that Vashti doesn't show up. And so all the governors and all the people that are with Xerxes at this party are like, Vashti didn't show up. And because Vashti doesn't show up to come at the king's command, this is going to affect our wives. Literally, this is what they're talking about. So they're saying because Vashti has done this thing, I was going to say made an example of the king, but Vashti has actually done this thing, it's actually going to filter down through the kingdom, and we're going to have all of our wives are going to dishonor us. And they're going to act just like Vashti. So Xerxes, who's probably, let's say he's about 40 years old, they say, Xerxes, you need to usher a decree, and that decree would mean that you're going to basically shelve Vashti. She's over. And in this decree, you're going to select another queen to take her place, and that you're going to tell all of our wives that they need to respect their husbands. Isn't that funny? I just thought I think it was kind of hilarious reading it. These guys really didn't care about the king. They cared about control. So this sets the stage for Esther. So the king, Xerxes, comes on the scene and he says, okay, we're gonna basically take all the young virgins and they're gonna have 1 year of treatment to get ready to present themselves before the king. So you have an entire year to come. They give you beauty treatment and ointments, things you buy at Target, or you buy at wherever ladies get their stuff. Okay, Nordstrom's. Okay, let's try. So more high-end stuff, this is. And so Esther comes on the scene, and it says here in verse 7, chapter 2, my first verse, now we have her uncle, I say Mordecai, but it's Mordecai. I don't know why I say K-I, but I do. So Esther probably marries, moving fast forward just a little bit, Esther probably marries Xerxes at the age of 17 years old. So kings in those days married young women. So some say that she could be as young as 14 or as old as 20. So I just said, okay, I'm just going to put it somewhere in the middle and call it 17. So Esther has lost her mother and her father. And her uncle, Mordecai, makes the choice to raise Esther. So Mordecai is probably in his 50s and 60s. I mean, it's a beautiful picture of the generations working together. So here comes Mordecai. He steps into the scene. He says, I'll go ahead and I'll raise you, Esther. So out of his own goodwill, he's been raising Esther for X amount of years, and this decree goes out for the next queen to be married to Xerxes. And so Mordecai comes in on the scene in verse 7, and he says, and Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, which is the Hebrew name for Esther. That is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother, verse 7. The young woman was lovely and beautiful. When her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. I mean, what an amazing gesture. So it goes on here that Mordecai begins to talk to Esther and tells Esther, hey, you should be, I don't know if Esther was called into it or he made sure that she got involved in the process to be queen. And so it says in verse 9, now the young women pleased him. So let's go to verse 8, chapter 2. So it was when the king's command and decree were heard, and when many young women were gathered in Shushan, the citadel under the custody of Hegai. Okay, boy, these names, man. Okay. That Esther also was taken to the king's palace into the care of, Haggai, but not Haggai, all right. The custodian of the women. Verse 9. Now the young woman pleased him, and she obtained his favor. Let me tell you, God gives you favor for a reason. Now, Esther doesn't know it. I want you to think about this. She's 17 years old. And she's 16 years old. And she's coming in, and the leader, this Haggai dude, that the Lord actually grants her favor at 17, not for her own platform. Like, favor has to go somewhere. So it says that she obtained his favor, so he readily gave beauty preparations to her besides her allowance. Then 7 choice maidservants were provided for her from the king's palace. 7. How long does it take to work on your face? And moved her and her maidservants to the best place in the house of the women. And Esther had not revealed her people or family, for Mordecai charged her not to reveal it. That means that she did not tell them that she was Jewish, because Esther was Jewish. And every day Mordecai, verse 11, and every day Mordecai paced in front of the court of the women's quarters to learn of Esther's welfare and what was happening to her. And so at verse 12, let's just go ahead and read verse 12. Each young woman's turn came to go to King Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, after she had completed 12 months of preparation, 12 months, according to the regulations for the women, for thus were the days of their preparation, apportioned 6 months with oil and myrrh, ladies, and 6 months with perfumes and preparations for beautifying women. I'm just going to keep reading. Verse 16. So Esther was taken to King Xerxes into the royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign, his 7th year. The king loved Esther. So I guess there is love at first sight? I don't know. The king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. In verse 18, then the king made a great feast called the Feast of Esther for all his officials and servants, and he proclaimed a holiday in the provinces. Well, there are 127 provinces. So he proclaimed a holiday in all these provinces, and he gave gifts according to the generosity of the king. So Esther is made queen, let's just say at 17 years old. And by God's grace, Xerxes puts a crown on her head. And she's promoted with favor. She has no idea what's coming down the pipe. And so in verse 19, we won't have a chance to read it, but Mordecai, because of royalty, there's always people trying to assassinate everybody else. It's a joust for position and power. And I want to say too that this is all, I'll just say it this way, This whole story is about God's grace, but it's all around politics. Like, this is all around politics. You have Haman, who was a governor. You have people who are seated in high places. This is not happening in the church setting. This is actually happening in a political arena. Whether you're talking about Daniel, whether you're talking about Esther, whether you're talking about like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whether you're talking about Elijah, it's all around politics. And for some reason, we've created this separation between church and politics, which I'll have a chance to talk to you more about that in 2 weeks. But there is no separation if it's God's government, his establishing his government in the context of saving a nation. So here we go. Okay, so Mordecai gets wind, verses 19 through 23, ending chapter 2. He gets wind of a plot that's going to kill Xerxes. And after he gets wind of it, he goes and he confides with somebody who goes to the king himself and says, hey, there's 2 dudes that are part of your, not your cabinet, but a little outside of your cabinet, and their plan is to murder you. So they went ahead and they investigated it, and they found it to be true. And Persian torment was the writers say was the greatest level of torment ever known to man. Like, if you messed up in a Persian government, in a Persian empire, I mean, we talk about impaling, we talk about all kinds of things, taking your skin and stripping it, putting oil on your face and liquid gold down your throat, and they would, you'd be eaten alive by insects. Like their form of punishment was catastrophically severe. I'll just say that. So these 2 guys are basically caught and they're convicted. And it's written in the annals, the books of the kings, and Mordecai is forgotten. There's no reward. There's no nothing. You ever done something and you felt like you should have gotten some kind of recognition, but you didn't, or you were looked over? Well, Mordecai's looked over. More on that later. So now we jump into the more say, juicy stuff. 3 through whatever. So here comes Haman. And chapter 3, verse 1, and after these things, King Xerxes promoted this dude named Haman. So 5 years have passed so Esther's probably around 22 years old, right about here, right about now. So Xerxes might be around 40-something, but just to kind of set the context, so she's been, let's say she's 22 years old, and now the king promotes this madman, a really manipulative political figure. Do you know anyone like that? Don't say anything, all right? Super manipulative, wise in the sense of, they know what to do behind the scenes, and they know how to convey and manipulate and construe and all kinds of things. This is Haman. Haman is like the worst of the worst. All right, so the king promotes this dude, Haman. So he's promoted. He's an Agagite, which I heard this morning was an Agagite. Wow, this is going to be, okay, Saul, remember Saul, Old Testament Saul? Everyone say amen. He was supposed to kill all the Agagites. Just trust me. And he doesn't. He disobeys the Lord. And now we see Haman, who is a descendant of someone Saul should have killed. So here comes Haman. He's promoted. And he advanced him, and he set his seat above all the princesses who are with him. So in the government, in the Persian Empire, Haman is elevated instantly to the number 2 man. And all the king's servants, verse 2, who were with the king's gate bowed and paid homage to Haman, and he loved it. So what does that mean? That means anytime Haman showed up, you bowed to him. That means to give homage or respect or a level of honor. So the king had commanded concerning him, but Mordecai would not bow or pay homage. Would you underline that if you have your paper Bible? Just like the 3 Hebrew kids, when the idol was shown, Haman would walk by and Mordecai would just stand up and just look at him. Everyone else is bowing down. But Mordecai is just, I don't know if he's looking down. I think he's just staring at him. See, Haman is making a stand. When the rest of the, did I say Haman? When Mordecai is making a stand. So when the rest of the empire is bowing down to pay this dude homage, Mordecai is standing up and civilly disrespecting him. And there's a time and a place for us to make a stand and disrespect someone who's evil. And just don't bow down to anything. So happy birthday, by the way, Jordan. He wanted to make a grand entrance. Well, we're not going to do that. No, we're right in the middle of Esther. Okay. Verse 3. Now the king's servants who were within the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you transgress the king's command?" There's a time and place to transgress a king's command. It doesn't mean you don't face the consequences. But this is what they're saying. Dude, you know what the king said, and I just told you how torturous this empire was. And so now it happened, verse 4, now it happened when they spoke to him daily, he would not listen to them. Wow, I love this dude. And they told it to Haman to see whether Mordecai's words would stand, because he's standing. For Mordecai had told them he was a Jew. In other words, I'm a believer. We'll just use believer, more New Testament sense. And I don't stand for what you're doing, so I'm not going to bow to what you're doing. I'm going to actually make a stand for who I believe and what I believe. This is Mordecai. And Mordecai is very aware of how powerful the Persian Empire is and just what might be in front of him if he continues to stand. This was not just a small gesture. This was a huge gesture. Mordecai is the only dude that's standing. And Haman, so filled with pride, can't handle the fact that Mordecai won't bow down to him. Kind of like some policies and governments. And I don't have to adopt a woke agenda. I don't have to say what you want me to say. I don't have to use pronouns the way you want me to use pronouns. I'm not going to do it. I am taking a stand for righteousness. This is what Mordecai is all about right here. When Haman, this is verse 5. When Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow or pay him homage, Haman was filled with wrath. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him that the people of Mordecai, instead, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews. This is super important, who were throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes, we'll just say that, the people of Mordecai. So Haman is so upset that Mordecai will not bow down, he has a grander plan. I'm not only going to eliminate you, because I know you're a Jew, I'm going to eliminate every Jew in this empire. And since I'm the number 2 man, I'm going to petition the king, and I'm going to see that I can make this happen. So this is what he does. Mordecai still's like, do what you want. So verse 8, then Haman said to the king Xerxes, because I'm saying Xerxes because New King James has a longer word, all right? There's a certain people scattered and dispersed among the people in all the province of your kingdom. Their laws are different from, see, does this sound so much like today? Their laws are different because they read the Bible. Their lifestyles are different because they follow Jesus. Okay. Their laws are different from all other peoples, and they do not keep the king's laws. Therefore, it is not fitting for the king to let them remain. Remember, this is a kingdom. This is not a democracy. This is not a republic. This is a monarchy, and whatever the emperor says, that's it. So if it pleases the king, let a decree be written that they be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who do the work and bring it into the king's treasuries. So I did a quick thing about that. 10,000 talents of silver is 12 million ounces of silver, which accumulates, based on the price today, is almost $400 million. So he's saying, I'm going to drop $400 million of my money into the king's treasury, and as a result, if you sign this decree, then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to kill these people who are willfully standing when they should be paying you homage. So the king took his signet ring. The king is not brilliant. I'll just say that. So the king took his signet ring from his hand and he gave it to Haman, and he said to the son of the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews, and he said to Haman, the money and the people are given to you to do with them whatever seems good to you. So he basically says, you can write the decree. And here's my ring as a symbol, because when you stamp the letter, that's my signet, that's my emblem, and that means all of Persia is behind this thing, a decree that you're going to write and that I don't even look at. Can you imagine what Haman's thinking? Dude, I am going to just blast these guys. First of all, he has all the vengeance and the revenge he wants to pour out on Mordecai, and he also wants to destroy the Jews, and he has complete authority to write the decree, seal it, and send it to the 127 provinces. Crazy. Then the king's scribes were called, verse 12, were called on the 13th day of the first month, the decree written according to all that Haman commanded. To the king's satraps, to the governors, this is the cabinet, right? This is like our cabinet, governors, everybody in the nation has this, and we're over each province, to officials, all the people, every province according to the script, to every people in their language, in the name of the king Xerxes, it was written and sealed by the king's signet ring. And the letters were sent by carriers into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. It's like rings of power. Adar, to plunder their possessions. Okay, so timeline-wise, from the time that was written, it was about 11 months. So it's crazy to think about this, but a decree is sent. It takes about 2 weeks for it to get to every single province, because they had to distribute. They had, the postal service was horses. They didn't have cell phones, right? They didn't have an Apple phone. Hey, text everybody, tell them, It was like 2 to 4 weeks for the word to get out. So this decree is written. It's going to be 11 months. This day, whatever this lock-in date is, that's the day every Jew, say 200,000 Jews, were going to be killed. And when a king issues a decree, it can't be revoked. And so here it is. Haman writes it, gets the signet ring, and seals it, and that's it. The Jews don't have any legal protection. Because I was thinking, why don't they just leave? Why don't they just go to another? They couldn't. And for various reasons, because of Persian law, they were trapped. They couldn't defend themselves. Can you imagine, if you're going to go to a gas chamber in 11 months and there's no way out of it, this is what's facing the Jews. This decree is going out. Chapter 4. How are we doing on time? When Mordecai learned, verse 1, all that had happened, he tore his clothes and he put sackcloth and ashes, and he went into the midst of the city and he cried with a loud and bitter cry. So that's sackcloth and ashes, all that, you're grieving. And he might be thinking, if it might have been because of me. Like, you could go ahead and kill me, but you're going to kill all my brethren? Like the entire nation? And he went as far as the front of the king's gate, for no one might enter the king's gate clothed with sackcloth, verse 3. And in the early province where the king's command and decree arrived, there was great mourning among the Jews. Can you imagine that? That's with fasting and weeping and wailing. And many lay in sackcloth and ashes, like there was no way out. So Esther's maids and the eunuchs came and told her the queen was deeply distressed, and the queen was deeply distressed. Then they sent garments to clothe Mordecai and take his sackcloth away from him, but he would not accept them. In other words, they were going to change his clothes so he can come in. He's like, no. Then Esther called, Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, whom he had appointed to attend her, and she gave him the command concerning Mordecai to learn what and why this, like, what is going on with my uncle? Like, remember, he raised her. So this Hath dude went out to Mordecai in the city square, verse 6, in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and some of the money that Haman had, which is about $400 million, that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasury to destroy the Jews. Verse 8, and he also gave him a copy of the written decree for their destruction. So if you don't believe me, here's the decree. Verse 11. So Esther, verse 10, so Esther spoke and gave him this command to Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that any man, woman who goes into the inner court to the king who has not been called, he has but one law, put all to death. So what's Esther saying? Esther's saying, like, I can't go to the king, because if I go to the king, there's only one law. And that is, I'm dead. So, let me just read that. To one law, to whom the king holds out his golden scepter, that was only exception, that he may live. Yet I myself have not been called to go in to the king for these next 30 days. So they told Mordecai Esther's words. That's where her first words were. And Mordecai told them to answer Esther, do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. So he was still trusting God that something would happen, but he says, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? So he gives her perspective. He's basically saying, don't think in your silence you're going to escape the sword. Just because you're queen doesn't mean that you're going to be permitted to live. And I was thinking about, I have a lot of thoughts on this. At some point, we have to move. At some point, action has to be taken. At some point, we have to say, just, my silence, as long as no one is bothering me, then I'm not going to move. I'm not going to take action. And Mordecai is saying, like, just because you're in the incubator of the palace doesn't mean that you're going to be spared. And so I don't know what was going on in Esther's head at this point. She's only 22 years old. But the older generation is passing some wisdom to the younger generation and exposing the possibility that, you know what, you're not going to be spared either. And I just want you to know that. Verse 16. Verse 15. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast for me. Because you can't do it alone, right? Neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maidservants and I will fast likewise. And so I will go to the king, which is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. I mean, I love her boldness. I love her conviction. But she's moving into uncharted water. And if he doesn't raise his scepter, that's it for Esther. She's gone. Chapter 5. Now it happened, so here she is. She's going to risk it all for the sake of her people. She's going to risk it all for Mordecai. She's going to risk it all for the Jewish. Now it happened on the third day that Esther put her royal robes and she stood. So just underline the word stand or stood in the inner court of the king's palace across from the king's house, while the king sat on his royal throne in the royal house facing the entrance of the house. And so it was. So the king is probably with us, the cupbearer, which was not Nehemiah at that point. With the cupbearer, he's not by himself. He has a crew around him, and he's sitting there, the king's entrance. So she dresses up in her royal robe, and she's going to make the appearance before the king. And the king is, by lifting up a scepter or not lift, that's how much power and authority he had. If he lifts up the scepter, you're spared. If he doesn't, you're dead. So there she is. So now you have the second person making a stand. The first one is Mordecai, who's actually standing against an evil person, in Haman, not bowing the knee. And you have Esther, who's stepping in more of an intimacy, relational connection, standing before her husband, who's the king, who never called her in, but there she is. She took a bold step, and she's standing before the king, and that's the scene that we see here. So it was, verse 2, so it was when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court that she found favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand, and Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter. Can you imagine just the moment, the emotion that Esther was feeling? I mean, she must have said on the inside, yes! You know, like when the scepter went up, yes! Okay, she probably didn't do that publicly, and she goes and she touches the scepter. That was what she was supposed to do. Now, she's the queen. And the king said to her, he said this 3 times to her, the king said to her, what do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you up to half my kingdom. Then the king said, verse 4, so Esther answered, if it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him. Then the king said, bring Haman quickly that he may do as Esther has said. I mean, he probably really loves Esther because he's like, get Haman over here. So the king and Haman went to the banquet that Esther had prepared. Verse 6, and at the banquet of wine, the king said to Esther, what is your petition? Now, let me just kind of take a few minutes to tell you about the banquet of wine. The banquet of wine is a traditional Persian banquet that actually is more about romance than anything else. And usually in the banquet of wine, the groom, person who's going to get married, he fills his cup with wine, and then the woman kind of says yes to this relationship is she takes the cup and she drinks it. And so at these banquet of wines, it could be playful where he fills the cup and when he's pouring his wine, he's saying, I'm fully devoted to you. That's the symbolism. And when she takes the cup, she's saying, I accept that and let's move on toward the marriage. And so sometimes the woman would come like this and she'd pull back and everybody would be laughing, So it was kind of this dance, this relationship, but actually Esther's strategy was to actually win the heart of her husband, who's the king. And she invites Haman to get a bird's eye, like a front row seat of this relationship, this cultivating, this intimacy. So you have Mordecai who's standing before Haman. I would say like that would be more ecclesia in the context, like whatever your policy is, I'm making a stand against it. But you also see the intimate relational part of our walk with Christ, John 15, where it's actually an intimacy with the king that actually gains favor, and when she actually presents her request, he can't wait to answer it. So here we are in this setting, like she's 22, but she's smart. Like she's 22, she's got a lot of wisdom. Say amen, ladies. Wow, the music's already started. So verse 3, so what do you wish, Queen Esther, and what's your requests? It shall be given to you up to half the kingdom. So this is what Esther does. So Esther answers, if it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet as I have prepared. So let's go to verse 6. It's the banquet of wine. Verse 7. Verse 6, and at the banquet of wine, the king said to Esther again, what is your petition? And it shall be granted to you, what is your request? Up to half the kingdom. It will be done. Then Esther answered and said, my petition and request is this. Let's have a banquet tomorrow, and I invite you to come with Haman. That's basically what she says. Verse 9. So meanwhile, we have this banquet scene taking place, and now we have Haman who plots against Mordecai, and he's talking to his wife, Zeresh, and they're saying, like, this Mordecai guy, he's driving me crazy. He's so filled with arrogance. And the wife says, hey, why don't you build some gallows in our backyard and hang him on it? Now, some translations, New King James says hang. The New Living Translation will say impale. And there's a vast difference between the two, believe me. And so Haman is like, I love that idea. And she says, his wife says, go to the king, go see the king, tell him what you're going to do, and let's get this Mordecai guy taken care of tomorrow. Well, the king, now we're in Esther chapter 6, the king can't sleep. I mean, God won't let him sleep. And he asked one of his servants to read the annals of the king. So they, hey, go over all my exploits until I go to sleep, basically is what he's saying. And it gets to the part where Mordecai actually informs and rescues the king from these two guys who were going to kill him. And and the king says, who's the guy that basically saved my life? And the servant says, Mordecai. And the king says, have we ever done anything to reward or to honor Mordecai for what he did? And the servant says, there's nothing that's been done. And here comes Haman. Just the timing was perfect. So here they are sitting, they're talking about this, and here comes Haman, and here's the divine reversal. Haman's coming in to kill Mordecai. He's going to talk to the king, and the king is like, yeah. He's going to talk to the king, and the king he's going to set this whole thing up. He has gallows that are being built in his backyard, and he's going to take down Mordecai. Meantime, God providentially is setting this whole thing up, and the king is like, who's this guy, Mordecai? And then they're talking about how do we honor him, and then here comes Haman through the doors. And he's like, he stands before the king, and the king is like, hey, tells a story. You know, if someone that, you know, is going to be honored by the king for some great thing that he's done, how would you honor him? Well, Haman's saying, there's no one greater than me. I mean, I just came back from the banquet. Like, he's talking about me. And so he basically says, treat that person as if he's the king. In other words, get him a royal horse, put him on his back, on the back of the horse, bring him through the city, you know, declare his great exploits. This is the person. And Haman's thinking, it's about me. And the king looks at Haman and says, that is a fantastic idea. Do it for Mordecai. Isn't that a crazy? Verse 10, then the king said to Haman, hurry, take the robe and the horse as you suggested, chapter 6, and do so for Mordecai the Jew, who sits within the king's gate. Leave nothing undone of all that you have spoken. So Haman took the robe. I just can't even imagine this. So Haman took the robe and the horse, arrayed Mordecai, and led him on horseback through the city square and proclaimed before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights in honor. It was Haman who had to say it. Don't ever leave God out. I'm serious. Like you're talking about, you know, we talk about our nation, we talk about these agendas, we talk about all this. Listen, God's in control. Like we're supposed to be active agents in all this. We're co-laboring with him. But there's things that God has set in motion based on the prayer, the fasting of God's people, that he is setting in motion that you and I have zero clue what's going on, but he does. So then, I got to move along here. So, yes. So what happens is that he parades him through this town, and Haman is so upset. Like, he's like, can you imagine? Like, so he goes back, and one of the king's servants say, hey, dude, like, we have to go to the banquet. Remember the banquet? Haman's like, oh my gosh, the banquet. Yeah. So he goes to the banquet. So we have the first banquet. We have parading Mordecai through all the city, and now we have the second banquet that he's invited to, and this is where Esther exposes Haman. Verse, and here I'm going to close, all right, because we still don't have time. Chapter 7. So the king and Haman went to dine with Esther. Now it's the banquet of wine. On the second day of the banquet of wine, the king again said to Esther, this is the third time, what is your petition? You're killing me, right? And it shall be granted up to you up to half the kingdom. Then Queen Esther answered, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition and my people at my request. For we have been sold, my people and I, had to be destroyed, to be killed and to be annihilated. Had we been sold as a male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could never compensate for the king's loss. So King Xerxes answered and said to Queen Esther, who is he and where is he? Who would dare to presume in his heart to do such a thing? She's already won his heart. And Esther said, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. So Haman is already humiliated by Mordecai. Haman's at this banquet thinking he's number two, that they both love him dearly, and she points the finger at Haman, and he's the dude who's trying to kill me. I mean, just a divine reversal, right? And the king arose in his wrath. So Haman was terrified before the king and queen. Yeah. Then the king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine and went into the palace garden. But Haman stood before Queen Esther, pleading for his life, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. And the king returned from the palace garden in the place of the banquet. He made another mistake because Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was. Then the king said, will he also assault the queen while I'm in the house? And the word left the king's mouth, and they covered Haman's face. That was it. They just put a bag over his head. Now Harbonah, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, look, the gallows are 50 cubits high, 75 feet, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good of the king's behalf and is standing at the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang him on it. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath was subsided. Now, some translations say impaled, and you don't even know what impaled, like what that means. Hanging is very nice compared to being impaled. And please don't get on your phones and be looking for the definition of impaled. Just, you can look at it. You can look at it later. Believe me, it's very graphic. So the plans of Haman are defeated in a moment. And it's a 22-year-old girl. I call them girl because I'm older. 22-year-old woman who has the guts and the wisdom to make a stand, not knowing what the outcome would be. You have a 55-year-old, 60-year-old man who releases a plan and who's constantly praying for, that would be his niece, right? His niece, while she's actually the queen in the court of the king. And the story would go, just kind of wrapping things up, the story would go that Haman is actually killed, and because there's a decree that's sent out, a decree can't be reversed, so Esther again intercedes, and she asks the king, because the king didn't reverse the decree, because he can't. That means there's a D-Day for the Jews. And so he tells Mordecai is elevated to the number 2 position. I mean, it's just crazy reversal. Elevated number 2 position, and they says, basically, what I want you to do is I want you to write a decree, but the decree can't cancel the previous decree. Like, I thought you could just write a decree that says something like, this decree cancels the former decree. You can't do it. So that decree was going to be enforced regardless. And so Mordecai basically says in this decree that all the Jews can defend themselves against any attack that comes, which was D-Day was about 8 months from now. So the Jews not only had a right to defend themselves, they had legal right to defend themselves. In other words, they had the support of the empire to actually defend themselves against this decree. And the story ends with the Jews actually killing about 75,000 people who went after them, and it does not mention anywhere in Esther that any Jew died in the process. That they defended themselves based on the decree, and the way we end the book of Esther is in chapter 10. And here's where I close. And King Xerxes imposed a tribute on the land and on the islands of the sea. Now all the acts of his power and his might, and the account of the greatness of who? The greatness of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? Verse 3. For Mordecai the Jew was second to King Xerxes, and was great among the Jews, and well received by the multitude of his brethren, seeking the good of his people and speaking peace to all the countrymen. And I was actually shocked when I saw that, because I thought it would end with Esther, but it ended with Mordecai. If anything, that should pique your interest. The things that Esther did was incredible, but I think this is a story about two people who took a stand. Oh, Esther did amazing things in romancing the heart of her king and her husband, but it was Mordecai who made a stand. And the book of Esther actually finishes with paying tribute to Mordecai. What does that mean for us? I know this, going through 10 chapters in the morning is pretty challenging. And hopefully there's elements of truth that maybe hit your heart this morning, whether you're a woman, whether you're a man, whether you're older, and whether you're younger. I think the point of it is that regardless of what, say, a government says, this is how it's hitting me, regardless of what a government is saying, in some cases telling us how to live, and these decrees, this intimidation that's coming towards us, is that, you know, when we make a stand, we have heaven's support. And that support come out of nowhere. And a divine reversal can happen in a moment. And I don't know what you're facing. There might be somebody here this morning, this afternoon now, like, you need a divine reversal. You just need a divine reversal. And I just, if anything, let's anchor on some hope that God can do it. Amen? So with that, let's stand. Let's stand. Stand, exclamation point. And Father, I pray for every person in this room. For some, they really, really need a divine reversal. And God, I pray that out of nowhere, your plan's revealed. And how you can set things up years in advance for a moment. And so we're praying for that moment, for those that are in this room who need that reversal. We just pray now that you would release it in your timing. Lord, thank you that you can set all the pieces in place. We don't know what's happening. We see this impending doom. We see all these things that visually we see, things that we see, things that we read, things that we hear. And Lord, may we never be a people without hope. You've called us to a future and a hope. So we stand in that this afternoon. We give you praise in Jesus' name. Amen.